Hey everyone, welcome to Handing the Shame Back. Gloria Masters is my name and I'm your host. And every week we bring a survivor story to you, and we're this week into part two with Jeanie Dean, who's from Wurundjeri country, which is in the state of Melbourne in Australia. She's an investigator, she's an expert witness, she turns pain into purpose, and she's going to tell us all about it. But amazing to have her on the show and discuss with us the wisdom and the insights that she has through her own journey. So part two, we're here just as we start. Please, trigger warning is in place simply because of the topic of the conversation. Don't put yourself through it if you feel triggered, and we do. All of us as survivors feel triggered at times. Don't watch. Come back to it later. In the show notes as well, as a part from direction for resource and support, we'll also have all of Jeanie's work, links, websites, etc., so that you can follow her, like, subscribe, do everything to support this amazing survivor. Jeanie, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
So as we're launching into part two, I guess it would be really useful for us as an audience to understand you went through the horror you did. You tried to protect people by not exposing or talking about what happened, which meant that then became you and not being able to look after the beautiful little girl or 15-year-old that you were. So moving on from that, what happened from that point?
So from that point, I became highly promiscuous.
Yeah.
I used a lot of drugs and made a lot of bad choices. And I met the love of my life, which was, probably the one good thing that came out of all of it, and as well as my two beautiful kids. So from then, me and my mum came back to Melbourne to be with my maternal family. And that was kind of the start of what I hoped to be a new beginning. And that took some time. My mum's pain infiltrated the ability for me to be able to deal with my own. And I assumed the role of parent to my mum, and we became incredibly codependent. Then in my 30s, it was, I think I mentioned in the earlier episode, a beautiful woman had asked me a question about who am I?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the beginning of the rest of my life, I think. It was the first time somebody, in my mind, that somebody had cared enough to inquire and be curious enough and challenge my thinking, that all of these roles of which I had assumed in my life were, in fact, my defining purpose as a woman. And in fact, it was certainly nothing of the sort. I then started, I worked in child protection, I worked in corrections, I worked in the prison system. And that whole point, I think, was me trying to figure out who I am, what happened to me, why it happened. And my whole focus and purpose was trying to understand why sex offenders do what they do. And I didn't believe that any one person gets up in the morning and says out of nowhere, I'm going to go and do this today. And so I wanted to be curious and afford people the same opportunity as I was seeking to be understood. And so I did that, and that didn't work. And I ended up feeling very unwell. And I then decided that I'd start really investing in therapy. And I met an amazing clinician by the name of Nick Valentine, and he utilized internal family systems theory as a therapeutic modality, which is a Buddhist principle modality that kind of identifies intrinsic physiological symptoms within the body, and then that is determining which part of you is being activated, to the point where now I can identify my vulnerability part as being probably about the age of 6 or 7, wearing a particular dress that my grandfather bought me, brown mousy hair all wet at the ends and my head down. And that little girl had never been able to share her voice, or nobody had ever explored her story. And so she kept popping up all the time, and that showed out in particular behaviors of frustration, impulsivity, anger, etc. And the reason why I started doing the therapeutic process, and what really helped me, was my kids. I was determined to not have repeated cycles in my family life with my children. At that point, my children were a bit younger. I didn't want arguments, I didn't want fighting, I didn't want aggression, and I wanted our home to be a safe place to land no matter what happened in their lives. And so then I sat down with my kids and, had age-appropriate conversations with them that, mum's just not doing the greatest. And they were then part of a healing journey. Us as a family nucleus did our healing together, and I wanted my kids to understand that if I behave a particular way or I get snappy, it's got nothing to do with you and everything to do with me, and this is why. And so my kids have grown up these wonderful, emotionally intelligent humans who can see things from other people's perspective and put other people's shoes on, and they're 13 and 16, and it's like, yes, okay, I've done it. And so what happened then was, it was, okay, I have utilized all of this pain and shit that I've been living with my whole life, and I've turned it into something that I can be proud of and that my kids can feel safe in. So what now? And in 2018, I decided to really turn my pain into purpose, turn my back on everything to do with the public service. And I started working as a consultant, and focused very heavily on capturing the voices of vulnerable people, including children and young people, because I think I will say we, are often treated as witnesses to our own experiences. And it is assumed that we won't be able to provide the information that's required for an outcome to occur. And when I started doing research and collaborating with different people, it was like, I think this has got less to do with the people that have had bad things happen and more to do with the people that have the responsibility to elicit what happened, and them not having the skills in which to do that. And so that's been my focus.
Yeah, and look, I love that, but can you explain for us a little more, because I think it's a very important point. It's seen that we can't be witnesses to our own experience. Can you please describe a bit more about what you mean? Because I think that underlies a lot of how survivors are treated. I use the term survivors because that's just something I love to use. But can you elaborate, please?
So when I talk about being a witness to your own experience, it's when somebody's talking to you about, particularly from a policing perspective, when you're being interviewed about something that's happened to you, it's done in such a way that feels very transactional. And in that moment, that should be the first opportunity where you get to really tell your story. But it's like you're interviewed by police, for example, and let's say that you observe a police interview. So if you observe a police interview, it's very targeted, it's very channeled, it's very focused. Often it's got a forensic lens to it. There's no trauma attached to it, or no trauma-informed focus attached to it. It's not victim-centered. And so you are then recounting a story as if it's somebody else's, because it's not, when this happened, what happened then, rather than how did that feel for you when that happened. And police will say, well, we're not therapists, we're police, we're investigators. What I would say is that your job as an investigator and as an interviewer is to ensure that you're meeting the person where they are. And that doesn't mean that you have to compromise the scope of how you gather evidence for the purposes of a criminal trial or whatever it may be. It means you need to be human, and it means that you need to plan and understand the person in front of you in order to be able to meet them where they are. And if that takes you 4 or 5 tries, then you do the 4 or 5 tries. And this is really, really important to me, as you can probably tell, because I'm doing this. This is really important to me when it comes to young children, because the number of times that I hear people say, well, they can't give enough detail. Okay, well, they can, but you need to be flexible in your approach in how you elicit that detail in order to achieve accuracy. And that's where I talk about the phrase of being a witness to your own experience. You know, you're either a credible witness or you're not. And that's not a title that any victim or survivor should be having to experience.
I love it. I love it. Survivors, welcome back to this. This is gold, because this is what we all experience. And Jeanie, apologies for cutting off, but not really, because it's so valuable. So I didn't mean it. What I love is you've said it in a couple of different ways, but meeting them where they're at. Look, we don't need survivors and people who have overcome this or trying so hard to feel more traumatized. And when you get those, as you described so beautifully, Jeanie, those transactional interactions, you're immediately put back into, well, are you telling the truth? And that, to me, takes us straight back to the age we were when the initial abuse began. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So we're not the adult sitting here today, we're the child again.
And even there's, I mean, even to the point where when I went through multiple different processes of disclosure when I was 32 years old, and the first disclosure was to my husband. I then didn't think that I would be believed, so I tried to approach the institution of which the person was affiliated with directly, and their response was, you would need to sit in a room with him under our member protection policy. So again, no trauma-informed positioning, despite the fact that in Australia we've had a significant Royal Commission and multiple degrees of research around this particular area. And then because before I went to the police, I wanted to be believed. And so I wrote to the person myself and described to him the impact that he had had on my life and how it's altered the way in which I parented my children.
Wow.
He wrote back and said, I'm sorry, we were young. And initially, and this is where you look at the cycle of recovery, right? Initially, that was enough for me. I genuinely felt like he was sorry. And then I went to therapy and pulled this apart and whatever, and walked out so angry. And then I contacted Queensland Police and provided them with what I had written, his response, all the information that I'd provided the association. And in that moment, thought, I'm going to be believed. I had an amazing senior sergeant, and he was fantastic. He then went and got posted somewhere else, so there's no continuity. And the detective that was doing the job was in the CI, not in a sexual assault unit. So again, no context of trauma-informed practice. And I was left feeling as though it wasn't really a priority. I got told by one police officer that this is going to be put on the back burner because we've got more pressing things to be dealing with at the moment. And so the system itself almost supports, without intent, I believe, the narrative of the offender of no one's going to believe you. And which is really heartbreaking, because I know I'm friends with a number of police officers. I have worked in the system myself for many, many years. I have a great deal of respect for our law enforcement colleagues and our therapeutic colleagues and our child protection colleagues. People do these jobs because they really give a shit, but the systems culture is so fractured that it is resulting in re-traumatization. It is resulting in kids not being believed. It is resulting in perpetrators abusing children, moving elsewhere, continuing to do it. And even if they're not continuing to do it, these people are left with the legacy of this person's abuse. And then we wonder why we have a system that is buckling, a criminal justice system that is buckling. The system is full of people with complex trauma. And we keep medicating them, we keep locking them up and thinking that we're going to get an outcome that is going to see a safe outcome for everyone. And the detective who arrested us when we were younger, I spoke to her many years later, and she was so proud of, we basically thanked her, and she said, "I'm just so proud that you're the exception and not the rule." And that broke me. And I've been dedicated to representing the voices of vulnerable people ever since.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's fire trucked, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I've had people that have been like, yes, tell your story. And then I've had other people that have said, oh, don't tell your story because you might lose work. People might see you as a liability. It's like, you know what? This is who I am. This is what's happened to me. I like to think that I'm a respectful, kind, trauma-informed, focused person. And if that makes people uncomfortable, that's not my problem anymore. My job is not to make people comfortable. My job is to create a narrative that sees children feel as though their rights are upheld and their inherent right to safety is something that will be honoured.
Yeah. It's you see, I was really hoping when you first started talking about turning pain into purpose that what you were doing was getting more support and encouragement from detectives and from police working in this space.
Yeah, so from a professional point of view, we definitely have huge support, allies. There's a beautiful woman by the name of Kelly Humphreys who used to work for Queensland Police. She is the true definition of turning pain into purpose, I believe. She's, phenomenal. And I've had the pleasure of working alongside multiple different Victorian police officers who absolutely are huge advocates for representing the voices of vulnerable people. So I don't want anything out of today's podcast to imply that, people are doing things with ill intent,
No.
What I think is happening is we have a system that is so congested and a system that is highly emotive, where biases creep in because we've still got an enveloped system when it comes to law enforcement. And until the public has a greater level of visibility,
Yes.
we're going to continue to see problems.
They need to be educated. There needs to be education given, because what you're describing is not dissimilar here in New Zealand. And, the New Zealand police have been amazing, and supportive and encouraging of children and adults who have experienced sexual abuse and assault. The reality being, it's still quite challenging for people to go to them, because the whole thing is, oh, I'm going to see the police. And so even though they could be wonderful people that they're going to go and talk to, there's still a fear. And I think just education and communication and normalizing conversations around all of this gives permission for people to feel more confident.
Yeah, and I think that we can't ignore the fact that working in this space is difficult for anyone. It's especially difficult for people that work in the space and carry a lived experience. And I think that it would be naive of us, based on the research that's very present and available, particularly since the Royal Commission and the maltreatment study out of the ACU, Australian Catholic University, that the police officers in which you're talking to are potentially victim survivors themselves. And so when we think about the prevalence of psychosocial injury in law enforcement, it is huge. And so we both walk in not understanding each other's context. And so I think police need to remember that this might be the 1000th interview that you've conducted as a law enforcement officer, but it's the first time this person's had to go through a process. And we need to appreciate that and take a minute to recognise that and what that might mean for the interview. And I think that law enforcement agencies as entities need to perhaps consider a cultural analysis review to determine the prevalence of sexual assault within their membership, and ensuring that they have appropriate systems, processes, and resources available to mitigate and protect people from further psychosocial injury as a result of vicarious and secondary trauma.
Yes, and also I'm also thinking too about, we are drawn, are we not, to a place and a role that we are either trying to heal, or we have some sort of knowledge or attraction towards because of lived experience. So my long-winded question to you, I bet you know what I'm going to ask.
No.
my very long-winded question to you: what do you think the rate of sexual abuse for themselves as children within the police would be for those that are specialising in this space?
Oh, I think if we look at the maltreatment study, it's probably similar numbers. We think
That's
about,
pretty high.
yeah, probably, 1 in 4.
Okay.
I think that it's, that's no psychometric or
No, I'm just asking.
evaluation, but I would say probably similar. If we think, we're all built out of a population. The maltreatment study was assessed based on a population. Police officers are part of that. If you think about what the ratio and the numbers are associated to their recruitment, you could probably the system could probably work it out and come up with systems to be able to mitigate risk moving forward. I think that, what would be really helpful, and I'm saying this as a person going through the system now, is I would like to see systems, not just law enforcement, but children's courts, family courts, prison systems. I would like to ask those systems to look within and figure out how they contribute to the problem, and stop thinking that the problem is everything else outside of them. Like police will say it's child protection's problem, child protection will say it's police's problem, family court will say it's child protection's problem, etc. And we keep throwing and slinging crap everywhere. Each system needs to look within itself. And then I would ask them to, particularly with police around sexual assault investigation units, is why does it have to be, why can't they engage consultants to provide their staff secondary consultation over sexual assault matters, rather than keeping the matters insular and resulting in victims not proceeding to court because the DPP doesn't believe that they've got enough evidence? And perhaps maybe the evidence that's unable to be obtained is because the person trying to obtain it doesn't have the skills in which to elicit it safely.
That's a really good point. I am aware, however, that we've gone down a road that's taken us away from hearing about your skill and what you're now doing. So with a few minutes left, not that we're speed dating or anything, but you've got 5 minutes, go. No, Jeanie, could you please share with us the other part of the skill set that you have, so we know that, you're an investigator, you're an expert witness. What would you like us to know with that as we're just coming into a closeout?
So I am what's referred to as a specialist interviewer of vulnerable witnesses. So I my focus and priority is interviewing people from vulnerable backgrounds, and that's children and young people, people with disabilities, mental health, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, First Nations people. My focus has been centered around them because they're the people that often have the biggest stories to tell, and there's not enough people that can sit with them to help them elicit it and process it. I also run a consultancy called Safeguarding Solutions Australia, and we provide services to various organisations, government, non-government, federal, state and internationally, around interviewing vulnerable witnesses, conducting reportable conduct and safeguarding investigations, and we provide expert witness reports to regulators around the foreseeability of psychosocial risk associated to harassment, bullying, sexual assault.
Wow. And just finally, what advice would you, I'm trying to absorb all of that and thinking, wow, what advice would you give to survivors watching this? Is there anything you would like to kind of gift them with?
What I would not, so I'll give you two. I think
Okay.
the one bit of advice I would give is to don't be afraid of being afraid. And an analogy that's really helped me and continues to help me is, and this was said to me by a beautiful, beautiful man when I worked in child protection, that no matter how big the storm and how heavy the rain, the sun always shines again. And so when I'm having, you're just drawing me into a teary. This man is incredible, incredible human being. And that has sat with me from the day that he told me, and it's got me through some really dark times. And I've shared that with multiple people in moments of chaos and crisis, to just say, remember that, your weather on your phone changes every day, and this situation is a moment in time, and this is going to change too.
That's so beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please stay there. Wow. Audience, such power in the wisdom of you guys out there, and people, including Jeanie in front of us now, the wisdom, the experience, and what she's been able to do with it. And I do have to end with this. No matter how big the storm, no matter how heavy the rain, the sun will shine again. So, as always, beautiful ones, I see you, I stand beside you, and I believe you.